Hey everybody, welcome to the Snow West Show. I'm Ryan Harris. Real quick, before we get into this episode, the Snow West Show is made possible thanks to Polaris Snowmobiles. Polaris is offering up to $3,000 off mountain sleds available now in dealerships. These are 2023 models. And in addition to that, Polaris is offering a free GoPro Hero 12 Black Edition to anyone who purchases any Polaris snowmobile during the month of October. Month of October only. So go see your Polaris dealer, check out all the new Chaos RMKs, Pro RMKs, all the other Polaris models available. Make a deal, take home your free GoPro Hero 12 Black, get $3,000 extra off on a 2023 model. See your local Polaris dealer or Polaris.com for details. Also sponsoring the show is 320 Guest Ranch, located in Big Sky, Montana, only 5 minutes away from Buck Ridge and Carrot Basin. 320 Guest Ranch offers lodging and accommodations for your next snowmobiling trip. Single cabins and large full cabins with kitchens are available. Check it out at 320ranch.com. And also, thanks to Fly Racing for sponsoring the show and helping us bring this content to you. Fly Racing is the #1 gear brand in Supercross and motocross, and they are bringing that same product innovation to snowmobiling. Whether it's monosuits, helmets, boots, gloves, or goggles, Fly Racing has you covered for your snowmobiling gear head to toe. Check them out at flyracing.com or Fly Racing Snow on socials. All right, on to the show. Hey everybody, we're here with Bret Rasmussen. To my left here, Ride Rasmussen style. Rasmussen riding clinics. Like you've been doing this for quite a while, teaching people how to ride snowmobiles, like going back to the mid-2000s.
Yeah, that's about right. I sold the dealership in 2006 and then jumped right into this.
Okay.
Yep.
And then to the left there we have Justin Stevens, Snow West test rider. Been doing these podcasts for we're into our third year on these now.
Is it that long?
Yeah. And I was looking at the numbers the other day.
Yeah.
We have over 600,000 downloads.
That's not too bad.
Going into our third year. We're creeping up there, doing pretty good. But I wanted to get Bret on here. We've had you on the show before. It's been did we do it last year or the year before?
I don't recall. I think we did it in Boise maybe 2 years ago.
Yeah, I think you and I are of that age where we don't recall much.
Don't remind me about that.
But no, I wanted to get you on the show, and I guess the first thing I want to jump into, we were talking about it just a second ago, the snowmobile industry is kind of in, I don't know what you would call it, maybe a mini recession, because a couple things happened. We had COVID, where COVID caused this craze, this high demand, and prices went up and inflation went up and products were hard to get. And so cost was higher. We were getting retail out of everything, retail plus on snowmobiles. And then, demand couldn't really keep up with or supply couldn't keep up with demand there for a couple of years. And then we had great snow, like two winters ago, we had phenomenal snow.
Yeah.
And then last year, supply catches up with demand. It doesn't snow, and we all just come crashing down.
Yep,
to a degree. But I don't know if everybody knows this. You owned a dealership in Preston, Idaho, Mountain Magic Sports.
Yep.
Artic Cat dealership. How many years did you own that?
Oh, it was kind of fuzzy in the beginning. Let's see. Going way back, my dad had the Artic Cat dealership in the 70s. And then they kind of let it go, and I picked it back up again when Artic Cat came back into business in 84. And so, I don't know, do the math, 84 to 2006.
That's 40 years.
I was going to say there's a 4 in there, so it should be pretty.
Yeah.
Not that one out. 40 years, and then you sold it what year?
2006.
Okay. Yeah, that's a run. So but I asked that because you've been around the block. Like, you've seen this, like you were just talking about, like Artic Cat went out of business for 2 years.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then came back. So what do you think of the state of the industry right now this year going into 2025 winter?
I'm glad I'm not in the dealership business. It would have been really nice during COVID to have the business again. It was phenomenal. I've never seen it like that, where you could actually get retail out of a snowmobile. That's unheard of in this industry. And so now we've kind of gone back to the late 80s kind of financial situation with the dealerships. It was pretty tough being a snowmobile dealer in that time period.
What was it like? I'm guessing you're talking about having to take more inventory than you want.
Yeah.
Kind of having that forced on you, having to floor that. You have to cover the financing on that. You have to insure all that. What's it like being a dealership through those tough times?
Well, so we weren't just a snowmobile dealer. We had a summer line, and we sold lawnmowers and chainsaws and that sort of thing. And so we had other things to fall back on, but still the snowmobile part of our business was really financially the biggest part of it. And so what we had to do to survive was to become unique. And we served the customer in such a way that they would drive for miles to come see us. And so we set ourselves apart, and it was really about our service that gave people a reason to come. We felt like we did a better job setting up sleds, and we had deep snow performance kits that we sold, and that's how we survived. And we're talking a little town of Preston, 5,000 people live there, so you just have to set yourself apart. Today, in today's world, I think it's still different, but really that's the key. There's a lot. The competition's really stiff. You can't make money selling the snowmobile by itself. You've got to find another source of revenue, accessories, whatever it is.
Do you think it'd be easier selling factory turbos? I mean, not that you were a Cat dealer, not that Cat has a factory turbo, but if you were selling snowmobiles today as a dealership, did these factory turbos make it easier or harder?
I don't know how to respond to that because I wasn't in a dealership selling those, so I have no experience. People want to buy the turbos, and they run so good. It's a big draw, but on the on the other side of the coin is the cost, right? So in the 70s, we were selling top-of-the-line snowmobiles for under $1,000, and now they're $20,000. I don't do the math.
See, I've wondered about that. I mean, you said low snow year, but we've had low snow years before. So I don't know that not having a lot of snow last year, although I'm sure it affected sales. But I wonder, of course, everything's gone up. And when I say everything, everything's gone up. Doesn't matter what you're buying today, everything's gone up. But I wonder if that maybe is, when we look at other reasons besides just snowfall, what are some of the other reasons? And I agree with Bret. I'm like, you look at the cost of it, it's, when money maybe was a little freer, people had excess with the COVID, some of the kickbacks, things like that. I think a lot of people spent a lot of money buying sleds at whatever cost because you couldn't get one. Nobody could get one. They were all gone. It was raced to the store to get them. Now it's kind of like, well, there are some. And then you have to start to think, do you really want to spend $20,000 to $24,000 on a new sled?
So part of what drove the business during COVID was people were trying to isolate themselves. They weren't traveling internationally. And you could buy a snowmobile and go out on the mountain and be by yourself and your friends, right? So
6 feet of distance.
Yeah, and right. And so it was easy to justify that. But in today's world, we don't necessarily compete with other snowmobile dealers or brands. We're competing with all sorts of recreation, and people they're traveling internationally, they're buying cruises, they're going to California, they're going wherever, to Mexico, and they're spending money, but not necessarily on snowmobiles. So that's what we're competing with.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, because that's come up a lot just in conversations we have, like people asking about, why don't people still snowmobile the way they used to? Like, well, we grew up with people having a cabin and then a trailer full of snowmobiles. Yeah. And like you were talking about, they were maybe $7,000 back in the early 90s for a premium snowmobile. It was easy to have a trailer full of snowmobiles and then go do that as a family every weekend. But what you're saying is exactly right. Like the Verbo market totally changed that. Like, well, we don't have to go to the same place every single weekend. Let's go try this. Let's snowmobile once. Mm-hmm. We'll rent them. Let's go try this next weekend. Let's go try this next month, and just go all over the place.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
And then those dang side-by-sides.
Well, like you said, in any given year, I mean, you're going to have a certain amount of money that you can spend to recreate. So when everything was shut down, I think that's when you couldn't get a side-by-side, motorcycles, snowmobiles, anything that was more like that personal side. Now you've opened that back up. So maybe it was just a little overextension on maybe getting a little excited about the number of sales and pricing, but I don't know.
You raced a lot when you were a dealership. How did that impact?
Well, I'd like to say that my racing career really put our name out there, created a reputation, and it was healthy for our dealership. The racing world is kind of interesting if you don't have experience. It costs a lot of money to go down the road with entry fees and cost of race sleds and a truck and trailer and everything. It doesn't come cheap, and I had to look at it from the business aspect that it had to make money for me, and so it was. I could write it off as an expense to start with because my dealership sponsored me among other things, but it became a profit center for me. Didn't make a lot of money. I put endless hours in, but we stayed in the black in the racing career, and so we wrote it off as advertising, and it really promoted our business. I'd like to point out that most racers are going to the racetrack in their late teens and 20s, and because physically I think we're at our peak, right?
Yep.
And snowmobile racing is a really physical activity. I didn't have the money, the financial backing to race in my 20s. I didn't start racing until I was 30 years old, and I had a great 15-year professional racing career after that. So I probably looked at it differently than most of the competitors because most of them were younger than I was. But they only paid the top spots, right? So most of the spots, most of the entries are going to pay the top three racers. Mm-hmm. And so you have to perform or it doesn't work.
Well, and you did that. I mean, you won. How many times did you win at Jackson?
I had 6 world championships there.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, never did do a king, but I tried. That's all I can say. I tried.
Well, and you always had, go back to the marketing aspect of racing there for you. You always had the wildest painted hoods.
Yeah.
And you did a pretty good job keeping the skis on the ground on those things because those paint jobs were pretty elaborate.
Yeah, they were. That was kind of fun, but it kind of comes back to image too, right? And you have to stand out, and that's what I excelled at, was standing out and being seen. And that's what was good for our snowmobile business.
What do you see has changed? Obviously, there's a lot, but what do you see has changed the most? What stands out to you from like the racing standpoint when you were racing through the 90s to what you see on the hill climb circuit now?
That's an interesting point. In the 90s, our mod sleds were full-on hand-built race sleds. And now the mod sleds are basically OEM factory sleds with a little bit of tuning and suspension work. Pretty crazy, huh?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, you kind of miss the days of that, the tube chassis, hand-built tube chassis.
Yeah.
Just the wild stuff.
They're doing some. I haven't been to the hill climb scene for some years, but they're doing some retro races now, I understand. Mm-hmm. I'd be quite interested in that. I need to resurrect some of my own old race sleds and see if I can perform.
What qualifies for that class? That's a vintage class, and it has to be 20 years old, right?
Yeah, I don't know.
Something like that. I don't know. I think that's a good idea because the brand new stuff is so fast and so competitive.
Yeah.
If you go back and you race 20-year-old snowmobiles, it brings a whole new element to it.
Yeah, it changes everything.
Because you're not just going to shoot straight up over under a minute.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it'll slow you down a bit. You going to go do that?
Probably not, but it's It's interesting. Maybe I could have my arm twisted and go do that.
Do you have any of your old race sleds?
No, I'd have to chase some down.
They're all gone?
Yeah, they're all gone.
Really?
I had to sell them to finance my habit.
Yeah, that's kind of the story with all of us, man. This ain't cheap. I had a line of thought there. When you were Artic Cat dealer up until 2006, as you said, and then you had this transition into Skidoo shortly after that. Talk about that, because you were involved with Cat when Cat released, the M7, and for a couple of years there, you had what was considered the top chassis in the sport, probably the best mountain chassis the sport's seen up until that time.
Yeah, so I could talk all night on that, but I'm trying to figure out how to condense it. The M7 was a phenomenal chassis, and it was probably the most tested mountain sled that Artic Cat ever released. And it was a mountain-specific sled. And there was a lot of resources put towards the development of that. And I had, fortunately, was invited to do a lot of testing and evaluation on that. And it was a fun project to work on. And then I guess I can call them bean counters, got involved at Artic Cat for the next generation of snowmobile, and they wanted to go away from the mountain-specific sled design. Mm-hmm. And when they did that, I think they really kind of went backwards. We lost our edge in the industry. Skidoo and Polaris were both chasing Artic Cat's M7 at that time, and they were starting to come out with some phenomenal mountain sleds. And so, in my own opinion, Artic Cat just lost their way in their mountain sled program. And I was forced to start looking for an alternative, because I was running a business trying to teach people how to ride mountain sleds and offering a guiding service, and I needed a sled that promoted the ride technique that I developed and was pushing. And Artic Cat wasn't doing that for me anymore. And so I just jumped over to Skidoo. Being as close in the industry as I was, I kind of knew that Skidoo was ready to come out with new chassis, and it would have been a Gen 3, right, with the XM
chassis, yeah.
Yep. So,
and that was a big leap forward for Skidoo, because the XP was not. That was more in line with what you're talking about with Cat. That was more of a trail sled with a long track kit.
Right.
That kind of approach. The XM is where they went, okay, we got to change the riding style, we got to change the approach, make this thing a dedicated mountain sled.
Right. And there was a huge change. I mean, at that point, I didn't want anything to do with Skidoo's XP, because it was a very difficult sled for me to adjust to and ride. But I was fortunate enough to get a ride on the XM before it was released, just because I think Skidoo thought if they could bring me over, it'd be good for them. And so they got me on a sled. I flew to British Columbia and spent a day on one of their sleds, and was quite honestly quite surprised. And it felt so natural, and it responded to the way I wanted to ride. And that's what I needed, was a sled that responded to the technique that I had developed and that we teach. And so with that, we spent the summer negotiating a contract, and I landed a deal with Skidoo, and I'm still there.
So that had to be around 2013, right? Because you did a year on the new Cats.
Yes.
So it was
model year 13 when I went to Skidoo.
Yeah. So looking back, like you're going back to M7 talk, when people talk about revolutionary chassis, sleds that changed the sport, obviously the M7, but also the Rev, the Skidoo Rev chassis 0304. Did you spend much time on that?
I I rode it from time to time, but I never did feel comfortable with it. I think it had its place. It was a great design, but not necessarily for mountain application.
Did you do any cross country racing or anything back then?
Very little.
Just mostly hill climb.
Yeah.
So when the Rev came out, you have a really kind of an engineering oriented mind. Like you've come up with products. You do a lot of stuff with suspension.
Mm-hmm.
Like probably one of the smartest minds in the industry as far as shock rates and spring rates and suspension goes.
I'm not sure about that, but
but you hang out with smarter people. But they're behind the cloud, behind the scenes.
Yes.
And you're out here. It's easy to look pretty smart. When you saw the Rev come out, what went through your mind as far as sled design and approach and all that for you?
I guess what I want to say is my first ride on an XP on the Rev was I felt like I was going over the front. It was the rider position on that sled was way up front, and I'm used to sitting in the back, and so that was kind of an awkward feeling. It didn't respond the way I wanted it to respond. I always felt like it was going to throw me over the front, so I just didn't have a good relationship with it.
So what do you think about the factory turbos? Like how revolutionary is that in perspective to the M7 and everything else that you've lived through?
So I've been dabbling in aftermarket turbos for quite a few years, and I continued to do that because the horsepower was phenomenal. But they were a tuner's nightmare. They were just inconsistent, and we were able to improve them and refine them to some degree. But when we got on the factory turbos, they were flawless and just phenomenal. Such a good ride, outstanding.
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts, Justin?
We've talked about that a lot this year in our podcast. You get on those and you look at what we went through for so many years with the old turbos and I just remember guys driving a couple hours and then can't get out of the trailer and they get to sit there and tinker on their toys all day while everybody else is enjoying the new snow. And so it's actually pretty phenomenal what they've done with the factory OEM turbos and stuff. And just, I don't know, they just perform, they hit hard, they work well. So I don't know, have we seen any failure rates? I don't really hear a lot about them. I mean, they all have issues.
Not
here
related
and there,
to the turbos, I would say.
Yeah.
I would say they've had issues outside of that, but nothing you can tie back to really the turbo.
It's pretty impressive when you think about it, because the aftermarket, I mean, those guys spent a lot of time. There was a lot of time and effort put into the aftermarket piece of it, but the fact that they can do it straight from the factory and be as flawless as they have been is pretty impressive. So.
Yeah. So all of this transition of you being a dealership and then switching over to Skidoo, I mean, that's all kind of the transition of you creating this Ride Rasmussen style brand, right? Mm-hmm. Like no longer being a snowmobile dealer, but now you go out and you instruct people on riding. Talk about that. Like, how did you get into that? What was that transition like?
Well, it started with when I sold the dealership. Artic Cat was running a demo ride program to promote their M7 line, their M series sleds, and so they invited me to run that for them, that program, and I did for a few years, and that's kind of where it started. I wasn't really thinking about creating a business to teach people a riding instruction business. I didn't have that in mind at all, but Artic Cat's vision was that if we took people out, the M series sled was such a new design. It was a stand-up ride design, and people were maybe not 100% comfortable with that. And so we went out on the road and showed the sled to people and taught them how to ride it, because it was different. You weren't going to necessarily love the sled if you didn't learn how to ride it differently. And so I spent 3 years doing that. And then they chopped the program, started putting their money somewhere else. You know how the marketing people are. And I came home and told my wife that I was going to start teaching people how to ride and charge them for it. Prior to this, Artic Cat was paying the bill, and people would join me and I'd teach them how to ride. And I felt like I kind of had a product that I could promote and sell, and she just looked at me and told me I was crazy. People aren't going to pay me to teach them how to ride. And
she didn't know how well you'd done building the Rasmussen brand, because you built that up well. So
exactly, and so because of her opinion, I was kind of on my own for a little while, but it's developed over the years. We've got a solid curriculum. People come to ride with me from all over the world. So it's been a really successful endeavor, and I guess I could say copycats. There are a lot of companies that are trying to copy what I've done and create a ride technique, a training program, and there's some successes out there, but I feel like I was the first, and probably I hope that I'm the best. I try to maintain a higher level, and we're doing pretty good, and so I'm pretty excited about where I've taken the company to at this point.
So do you teach? I mean, what does it look like as far as your curriculum goes? I'm not super familiar with it. So do you have some beginner stuff all the way up in through more advanced riding skills that people can sign up for, different levels, or?
Yeah, we don't necessarily have levels. We have repeat clients, so we give them some training and they go and come back the next year for a tune-up or whatever. But you basically, what our program consists of is basics. So rider position and basic operation, and the point that we focus the most on is riding effortlessly. Because just face it, snowmobiles are 500, 600 pounds, more than that with gear and snow and fuel, right? So if you're a 100 or even a 200-pound rider, a 600-pound sled's going to wear you out.
Yeah.
There's no getting around that. And so we teach people to learn to ride with the sled and not against it. And so with the basic instruction, you have to understand that veteran riders who profess to be as good riders as there are have a lot of bad habits, and they're hard to shake. But we start with the basics, and this is the right and correct way to do it. And if you're fighting with your sled, then you're failing. And so that's what we do. It all comes down to basics, and for new riders, they catch on really easy because they don't have any bad habits.
What are some of the bad habits that you talk about?
Oh, I don't know. Knee on the seat. Like, I guess the number one bad habit is that's really difficult to break is pull on the sled to get it on its edge. Every time you pull on a 600-pound sled to bring it over to its edge, you're giving up a lot of energy. You're burning calories, and it's wearing you out. And you can do that for a few hours and get away with it. But even the strongest guys, by the end of the day, they're wearing themselves out. And so if you can break that habit, learn the counter steer and the proper technique to roll the sled to its edge without pulling it over, that's what makes the difference.
So break that down just real quick. Like somebody's on a slope, and typically what's going to happen is they're going to wind up pointing skis downhill because they can't get it on its edge. Break that down. Like what do you teach? How does somebody get a 600-pound snowmobile onto an edge like that? I think.
Okay, so we've got we okay?
Yeah, I just got a little short there.
So I've done this 1,000 times, and so have you. If you're a snowmobiler in the mountains, you've lost the sled, you've lost your edge as you're traversing a slope, and the sled's now 2 skis down on the slope. And the natural thing is to pull the sled back up the hill. And how many times have you helped your buddy do that because he can't do it by himself? So you go pick up the sled and set him up, and he goes 10 feet and falls down again, right?
Yep.
And so the proper way to do it is to simply turn the sled down slope, right? And it's easy to gain your edge when you're not fighting gravity. Get it back on its edge. Now you can do a U-turn and continue to traverse the slope, and it's effortless. It doesn't cost any energy.
What would you say to somebody who just can't keep it up on the edge? Like, what are they doing?
To maintain your edge, it's all about balance. Sometimes it takes a little effort depending on the snow and the uneven terrain and how your sled's set up. If your sled's not set up exactly right, it's going to hurt you a little bit. There's a lot of components that go into it, but generally, if you're losing your edge as you're traversing a slope, it's because you're not trusting the counter steer. If the sled wants to, if you're pulling your sled to keep its balance all the way up all the way across the slope, it's because you're not in the counter steer far enough. All you got to do is counter steer. It'll bring the sled into the hill, and your body should be over the sled and not stretched out to the side.
Let's talk about like rider position. Like, where do you teach people to position themselves on the snowmobile, like, and grip and foot position and all that?
You need to be forward on the sled. So these sleds have so much power, and when you're riding in technical mountain terrain, it's hard to keep up with your sled. And so the further forward you are in the sled, the easier it is to keep up with it. Because if you get behind your sled, you're toast. You're going into defense mode. You're fighting all the way. And so you need to be up on the sled, be ahead of the sled, and when you're up on the sled, it takes less rider input for the sled to respond to what you want it to do. And we even offer a post-forward kit for the Skidoo sleds that move the handlebars 2 inches forward, brings the rider up into the right position, and suddenly your riding effort goes way down because you're in the right position. And so being at the balance point is so critical. And, we're all over the sled to maintain that balance point. Sometimes on one side of the sled, wrong foot forward and everything. But
do you teach a lot of, like, women's clinics?
We do. Probably, I think last year we did 3 women's classes.
So what do you teach differently there, or is it just the same concept?
It's the same thing. We don't teach anything differently. If there's any difference with women's classes, it's confidence. They need to build confidence, but it's the same basic principle. I got 2 points. Women don't generally have the same upper body strength that men have, and so when a guy can go out and muscle his sled to get it to do what he wants it to do, he's thinking he's winning. He's really losing because he's wearing himself out. Women don't have that ability to muscle their sled, and so they have to apply the technique, or they don't win. And so a lot of times it's easier to teach women because of that. The challenge becomes with their confidence, because we put them, I should say, we try not to put them in situations that scare them, because that's what their husbands do, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Right. They buy their wives a nice sled. This is what they do.
No, they don't buy their wives anything. They buy themselves a second sled and say, "Oh, this one's for you. This Boost 165 is for you. I've got a Boost 154.
Yeah.
But the 65 is for you."
That's exactly right. And so then where do they go? They go into the high mountain country, and the female rider is out of her comfort zone. She's intimidated by the mountains. And the only way you're going to build an individual's confidence is to let them get enough seat time on their sled so that they can trust it and start to enjoy their experience. And they have to do that on the trail or in the field at lower elevations where they're not intimidated. And as soon as they feel comfortable with the sled, then you can step it up and you can take them into the mountains. But you have to build their confidence, and you're not going to do it in the mountains.
Out in the field, what do you have them do?
Laps. Just do laps. When I was racing, hill climb racing, I would get up in the morning before work. I had a dealership to run, but I'd load up my sled and go. I had a track that was just a couple miles from where I lived. And I'd unload. I went alone, mind you, because I didn't know any better. I had lots of confidence. And I had a 1 mile lap that I would run, and it was a pretty good little short hill climb, and it was down the backside and down a creek bed, and then back up, and I'd do 10 laps, which was 10 miles. And every lap, the course changes because you're spinning and digging and creating moguls, and some days it's icy and some days it's not, and some days there's new snow and sometimes there's old snow, and mind you, it was a semi-technical course, but I was doing two things. This was my workout routine, because you know what it's like to do 10 miles on a sled on that kind of a course. So physically it was building my strength in preparation for racing, but most importantly, I was learning how my sled responded to the terrain and what I had to do to react to that, or set up for it rather. So the idea is to be proactive and set up for what's coming, and then you can go faster. And maybe not to the level that I did it, but when you're in the field, you start doing a lap, and maybe it's not a circle, but it's a figure eight, or it's, maybe there's some terrain features that you can use, some ditches to cross. But every time you do the lap, the course changes, and you start to understand how your sled's going to respond to the terrain. And now you can build confidence because you know what to expect.
I'm just sitting here in my mind picturing you doing these 10 laps on like a 95 EXT Mountain Cat.
Yeah, that's exactly.
Because doing that right now on a 2024, Turbo R or Chaos Boost, like, that's a different story.
Yeah.
You go back to those old EXTs, and even the 94, 95 EXT was a great sled. You go back to the 92, 93, that was a different story.
Yeah.
Yeah, they didn't have the track length and lugs and
not much for.
After you'd been through that 6 or 7 times, I'm sure it got a little
and then
dicey. So.
After 10 laps, I'd go to the store and unload my sled and put it in the shop and let it thaw out. And that night after work, I go and fix everything that I broke. New paddles, right? And do it again the next morning.
Oh my goodness.
Yep. Now, I remember because we did 1 year, 99. Winter 99-2000, where you built the project sled for us, and then we went and raced with you at like 5 hill climbs.
Yeah, I remember that.
And so we came down, and you had just bought another building in Logan, so kind of expanded your dealership from Preston into Logan. So I think we did all the work on that project sled in Logan at the new building. But I went up to your practice hill climb course with you, and went to a few races with you, and your program's intense. Like, it's not easy keeping up with this hill climb stuff.
Well, if you're going to win races, you got to put everything into it that you got. So
I wasn't winning races, and I wasn't putting everything into it that I had, but I had fun. No, that was fun. So, and Breck, in your early days, like in that transition to ride Rasmussen style and the clinics and everything, you were working with Brandt, and you were doing these series of videos called Schooled.
Yes.
Like how did that come together, and then how did that kind of fade away?
That's a kind of a really interesting story. So Brent was doing the demo ride program prior to when I started. I took it over from him, And on one occasion, I took the trailer to Colorado, Telluride, Colorado. And there was an individual there by the name of George Marsh, who I didn't know from anybody, that showed up for that demo ride. And the thing about the rides that I was doing, they were free to the individuals, so they weren't necessarily bought into the program. Some of the guys came with the idea that they were going to teach me how to ride, and I was the old guy. So
in 2008.
Yeah, I was
2009.
And so George Marsh come along, and he had a 175. I think it was a Skidoo, custom made thing with turbo on it. I can't even remember it was a turbo. It might, or an Artic Cat, or a Skidoo. It might have been an Artic Cat, but whatever it was a conglomeration of whatever. And he thought he had the best snowmobile in the world. And the way we did these rides was we'd do a safety meeting, and then we'd take off from the trailhead and head up the trail. And generally they had a destination that they intended to go to evaluate the sleds and let everybody ride them. But that was contrary to my program. And so on the way to our destination, I was always scouting for places off the side of the trail to ride, because people didn't ride in these places, and there was never tracks. There was always powder snow, and they were generally relatively close to the trailhead. And so George, he jumped right on my tail, and he was gonna teach me something. And he followed me off into some ravine just a few feet off the trail, and I just was kind of on an exploratory mission, and kind of dove off the edge and looked down there, and I thought, oh, it's kind of nasty. Probably ought to stay out of that. So I did a U-turn and went back up to the trail, and George couldn't do a U-turn. He had a 175, whatever it was. And throughout the course of the day, he kind of gained a little bit of respect for me and met me in my trailer when I was changing out of my riding gear, and we had a pretty good conversation. And he said, dude, that was the best experience I've ever had in my life on a snowmobile. And it turned out that he was a videographer, and he took a lot of interest in possibly creating some videos. And so over the course of a few years, he learned how to ride. He got a snowmobile that he could ride. And him and I and Brant and a few others did some filming, and I think we had 6 of those schooled videos. It was kind of fun to do, and it was just hard to make money doing it.
Did you make money doing it though?
Well, it wasn't really up to me. It was George that needed to make the money, because he had the investment in it, and so it was good for me because it kind of promoted what I did, and it promoted Brant's business. But George finally gave up on making money and went to do something else, I think.
Yeah, it's a tough industry to go make money in like that.
Yeah. Well, and in those days we were selling DVDs, and you can't sell them anymore, so it makes it a lot harder to market your product.
Yeah, and now you can churn out a film like that in a couple days.
Yeah,
just throw it on YouTube.
Yeah,
some of these guys that are turning out all these, and they're great content, phenomenal content, easier content too, because you can film half of it with a camera that's this big, versus what George was carrying back in there.
Yeah.
And having to go burn DVDs at $2 a copy or $1 a copy, and burn 20,000 DVDs, and then go to shows and sell them. Yeah. Before anybody even saw them.
Yeah. It was a difficult thing. Things have changed, haven't they?
They have. What's one of your wildest experiences teaching? I know you've ridden in Russia, Sweden. You've been all over the planet on snowmobiles.
Oh, I don't know. I've got lots of experiences. I don't know. I've been to Iceland. I've been to Russia. Most of my more recent experiences have been in Russia, and I've got a lot of stories for there. But probably Iceland. The Icelanders are really aggressive and competitive, and if one of them is able to get up a hill, then they all have to. And so in Iceland, they don't have trees. You go over there to ride, and it's all open terrain. It's, mind you, it's pretty technical and a lot of steep terrain, and there's volcanoes and all sorts of stuff. But when they come to North America to ride, the trees intimidate them. And and so they talk about walking trees, and the learning point in this whole thing is, we were sitting at dinner one night with a group from Iceland, and we were talking about the day, and they're always so focused on the trees they can't pick out a good line. They're always looking at the hazards and not where they should be looking. And I was trying to explain that to them. And one guy was sitting at the table, and he dropped his utensils, and he opened his eyes, and he said, "You can't see the trees, can you?" I said, "No, there's no trees there. I just look at the gaps." And he got it. And the next day he rode phenomenally. He quit looking at the hazards. So that was a great experience. That was really rewarding to finally get a group to respond to what we're trying to teach them.
So what is Ride Rasmussen style? What's Rasmussen style? Is it like a skinny dude just ripping it, wearing Wranglers?
Apparently, if you look at some of the old picture photos in my hill climb days, I wore Wranglers and a shop towel in my back pocket.
That's awesome.
Ride Rasmussen style is kind of just a catchy name that I came up with early on, not even knowing that I was going to build the business to what it is today, and it kind of relates to me, obviously, but it's a style, or a technique that I've developed over the years that works on every sled. It doesn't matter if it's a Skidoo or an Artic Cat or Polaris or whatever you might have out there. The technique helps you to ride with less effort and have more control of your sled and get deeper into the backcountry safely and return.
All right. Well, you've returned. Well, it must work.
The hardest thing I ever did was the Iron Dog race in Alaska.
Well, that's funny you say that, because we just did a show with Chris Kaltenbacher, Smasher,
okay,
talking about his Iron Dog experience.
Yeah.
Have you gone back? Do you want to go back? Like, was it that bad?
I'm not going back. It was a great experience, but it's not one that I need to repeat.
Oh man, I couldn't imagine doing that one.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on the show, Bret Rasmussen, Ride Rasmussen Style. Thanks, Justin Stevens, for coming down to Utah. We're here at the Utah Snowmobile Show, by the way, and helping out with the podcast here. You've got a seminar coming up here in about an hour, so you're going to go teach a bunch of people as best you can in a classroom here. Those are always fun to check out, but it's fun talking to you and hearing your stories, but appreciate the time.
Okay. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, you bet.
It's a good time.
It's a good time. All right. We'll catch you later. Thanks, everybody.
Mm-hmm.